from TSN, former Toronto Maple Leafs defender. It is Frankie CORRADO. Frankie, how are you, buddy? Happy Friday. Are we overreacting? Are we doing the classic Leafs media right now?
No, I don't think you're overreacting. I think anyone who's watching the games is saying, well, what's changed, right? We brought in some different guys. It was in hopes of changing the complexion of the team. You're seeing a lot of the same stuff. And I understand it's going to take time to kind of transform the way this team does things on a game-to-game basis, the mindset. Rosie, I heard you talking about like the identity of this team just not being defined yet. I think those are all valid points, and I think a lot of Leafs Nation would agree with you, and I don't think it's an overreaction.
So do you think you could go to you go through the standings and it's like, why am I looking at the standings? There's teams played 3 and 4 games, it's kind of silly. But when you go through the league, it's a good chance that there's multiple teams that are in the same boat that are still figuring out who they are and drop a couple weird games and don't quite have the jam, and you could pick them apart, but we're following the Leafs. So is that the problem? Like, are we the magnifying glass that's picking this team apart, or is it legit? Is it these guys should be better? This should be clicking a little bit more, or again, is it an overreaction or is it reality?
I said this a lot last year. For a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations, and a lot of people consider Stanley Cup contenders, man, there's a lot of issues with that roster. And it's crazy to think that way because they truly are going to be a playoff team. They're going to have a great regular season, even with a slow start. I have no doubt about that. But you can nitpick a number of different issues with this roster, and they'd still be valid. Okay, like I always said, leading up to this year, the second line left wing situation was going to be an issue for that team because that's an incomplete line. It still is an issue. And now the third line, because of that, lacks an identity. And we saw last night Fraser Minton, who's playing third line center, get moved down to the fourth line. David Kampf is not exactly a great third line center. Oh, and by the way, your fourth line's getting caved in every time they're on the ice, regardless of, that line maybe having a little bit of jam and what Reeves brings to the table as far as his physicality and chirping guys on the bench, all that kind of stuff. So that's just up front, and those are valid. And then on the back end, you think about the fact that Morgan Rielly, Rosie, you played with him. He didn't have a number one guy to play with when you were there, when I was there. He still doesn't have that right shot D-man who can play with him night in and night out and really be that true number one pairing that goes out there and munches 22 to 25 minutes in all situations. So there's an issue. Now you've added in John Klingberg, who I can appreciate the fact that they wanted a little more offensive pop on the blue line. So I get that. The problem is they just don't have, they don't have the guys that can kind of be those big, rugged, break up cycles, cross-check guys in front of the net, win-lose puck battles. They don't have that. The box outs, so there's a number of issues that way. And then you get into the net and you're like, hey, Ilya Samsonov did a good job last year. He played actually pretty good game last night, I thought. But you got, somewhat of an unproven guy in him and Joseph Woll, who's, just getting his feet wet in the NHL. But they still remain a team that's going to make the playoffs and a team that, has Stanley Cup aspirations. It's crazy to me, but that's how much offensive firepower they do have within the top two lines.
It is a reality. A couple things that stood out for me last night too, boys. It's like the same old story. 11 of the 14 goals have been scored by the core four, right? We're having that conversation again. The bottom six really not producing, but I'm happy you brought up the name John Klingberg, man, because the more and more I watch, and again, he is not the same guy we saw with the Dallas Stars X amount of years ago. Might as well just put him at wing. He doesn't play defense, and he got worked. I know it's the 4th game of the season, but he got danced. He's been danced a bunch of times this season. How could they better insulate John Klingberg, I guess is my question, Frankie.
He's got to do it himself, man.
Yeah.
I don't care. You make $4 million in the NHL, figure it out. The guys that need to get insulated in the NHL are the young rookies or the guys that are making league minimum or less than $1 million. And you're like, man, this guy's out of his depth and we know that. So we need to insulate him. You make $4 million, figure it out. I don't know what to tell you. You want to be really careless defensively, that's on you. Teams are obviously going to give you an opportunity because what you bring to the table offensively, and that's fine and dandy. But you need to have some kind of semblance of playing away from the puck. It's just there's too many players now that can score in the league. There's too many teams that have depth guys that can beat you. So it's not like, like I feel like when I played, I'll give you an example. I would go out there playing for the Canucks and we'd play the LA Kings. And I knew that I was going on against like Clifford or Trevor Lewis. And I knew I was just going to get run shift after shift after shift. I didn't exactly like worry that they were going to fill the back of the net on me. But you look at other teams now, like Florida in the playoffs, their third line was like Lundell, Bennett, and Reinhart. Those guys fill the back of the net, man. So like if you're not ready to go, you're going to chalk up a lot of minuses. I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, like you can try and insulate him, but who are you going to insulate him with? We know who the 6 defensemen on this team are. Like if there's a 7th guy, he's not coming up and he's not going to be the answer for John Klingberg. I was talking about this after Klingberg and McCabe got split up. The best thing for them to do, because when you look at that pairing on paper, you're like, it makes sense. Offensive guy, McCabe's pretty stout defensively, physical guy. They got to get in with the D coach, Mike Van Ryn, and they got to just crush video and go through shifts and say, okay, when you're going in, the other guy's not going in. Like when he's going to play outside the dots, you're cutting the ice in half. Like you guys need to start getting on the same page. I haven't seen that yet. And I know they got split up, but that would be the solution, man. Get on the same page with whoever you're playing with.
So we're going back to Bantam style X's and O's on how to play defense, apparently. But when you bring up that point of like the good teams who have those stud, rock solid D-men who are in front of the net, and like you watch teams like that, and they're just controlling their D zone. They're in control all the time, even if they don't have the puck. And to have that on your team, it's so nice. You're just confident in them, and there's so much trust. Where when you watch the Leafs, sometimes it looks like panic mode. It's like panic mode. They're spinning around going, who's going there? Who's got that guy? And they're spinning around going, what? Who? Where did I go? And it's like, holy shit, man, you're scrambling all over the place. And listening to what you just talked about with that, and then the holes in the front end where some lines aren't complete and you're mixing guys up and putting guys where they shouldn't be, it starts to lean towards they need to make a substantial change to this. And there's no way you can make a substantial change to this roster without doing something to the core four, blowing it up, call it that if you want, but moving someone out in order to change this team. And if it continues, like Nick said, 6 weeks of this stuff, of what we just watched the last couple of games, that's the only option. Because like you say, they're so highly rated as a Stanley Cup contender. And then you look at it and you go, why are they? Because they've got 4 or 5 high octane highlight reel type guys. When is the last time that's won the Stanley Cup? Look at the guys who win the Stanley Cups. They're riddled with defensive juggernauts, and they have sick goaltending, and then a massive group of forwards with studs on the top, and then just depth all the way down that can get it done. Like you say, third lines that can score tons of goals. We're starting to, as we talk, I'm starting to get a little worried here.
You know what? It's fair. Just to go back to that like D zone thing. So like I've played for Keefe, so I kind of know like the philosophies there as far as breaking the puck out. They're a team that they go like the D-man goes back for the puck, and a lot of time it's like a strong side play or try and bump something to the middle. And I kind of learned after playing for Keefe. I went to Belleville. I played for Troy Mann, and he would say, we don't call it a rim, we call it a bypass. And essentially what we're trying to do is bypass the forecheck and push the battle out into the neutral zone. So, and that was one of the things I had to adjust to, because I was always going back for pucks, and it was like this frantic thing where someone's forechecking me and I'm doing a shoulder check to see where I'm going to bump this thing to, when I could just make life a little simpler on myself and just bypass the forecheck and get it into the hands of the wingers. Like the Penguins, who admittedly, like, last year wasn't a great year for them, but like Mike Sullivan's philosophy is, let's get the puck out of the hands of the D-men as quick as possible and get it into the forwards, because those are the guys that should be handling the pill. Like I would like to see a little more of that philosophy where, you push it up the ice, you push the battle up the ice, you gain territory, right? And that way you play like a 3/4 ice game where you're not spending as much time in your own zone. And Rosie, to your point, it doesn't become this frantic thing. I thought last night they did a better job of limiting like odd man rushes, rush chances. So that was the one positive I take out of that game. As much as it was maybe a low event game for the Leafs, I felt like it was a lower event game for the Panthers. But like, I would like to see them take advantage of a team every once in a while. Like, that team was missing Montour, Ekblad. They don't have Gudis. They don't have Mark Stahl. Like, I would
Bennett.
have just liked to see them go pedal to the metal, full throttle. And it's not even about, like, it wasn't even going to be about, like, running guys out of the building. It was just going to be like, hey, we're coming into town here. We're a little ornery because things haven't gone well. And we're just going to step on the gas pedal for 60 minutes and fill the back of the net. And then, like, you know how it is. Everyone feels good. Going back into the room after, a bunch of the boys got their cookies, right? Like, everyone's feeling good about that kind of stuff.
Let's hit elbow room.
Yeah. And so, you know what? Like, I get it, because I get what you're saying too about, maybe moving a big piece, because last year, with the way things ended, I think a lot of us thought, how do you go on with the same group? Right. And if you're going to make a substantial change to the team, the way the complexion of the team looks, it basically came down to two guys. It was going to be, you're going to move on from Marner, or you're going to move off from Nylander. And they decided to bring everyone back. After looking at the way things, went in the offseason, I was of the belief, it's like, you got to move on from one of these guys. You got to change things. But I just wonder, like, who you bringing in that makes you better? I don't know. I juggle back and forth with it, and they're both valid to me, but I really do juggle back and forth with it. Like, does one defenseman make you a better team? You're still going to have deficiencies,
Yeah.
because now you're going to lose a big piece up front. It's, there's a lot of external factors, whether it's the cap or, players that are not available to you. But I agree with you, Rosie. If you're really going to change the identity of the team, like, it probably, in order to bring in elements that change the identity, it would have had to have been, one of those two guys, and they decided not to. And now this is the path that they're on, and they're going to have to make it work internally.
Yeah, it's one thing to play armchair GM, and I get that. It's another thing to actually to conduct business. Like, people want to see the Tkachuk trade. I'm sorry, there's just not Tkachuks out there where you're like, let's get this guy and put him on our roster. Let's swap him for like a Mitch Marner. It just doesn't work that way, and you guys know this. You played in the league. The other thing I noticed, Frankie, that's really, really evident, they're not playing with speed, like the pace. I think they're playing really, really slow, and I think I have to credit Florida. Like, Paul Maurice is clearly onto something, and I think it's almost lazy to say, oh, they got Bobrovsky, they got goalie again, but like, they're not playing with the pace and speed they should be playing with. Like, if you watch that third period, the last 10 minutes, dude, they were flying. And I know Gregor played a lot. Matthews is buzzing out there, Marner, but I want to see them consistently play with that pace, like utilize your speed, no?
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? So I've been doing the games at Scotiabank Arena with the Tap Man for a couple of years now, and we've kind of seen a little bit of a transformation of the team. It's subtle, but what makes the Leafs hard to play against when they're at their best, it's quite obvious. They're not going to run you out of the building. But what they do is, if you're an opponent, you look at it after the game, and if the Leafs had a really good game, you say, man, I didn't touch the puck a lot. And then you also look at it and say, man, I was chasing it, and I'm exhausted, because those guys were fast tonight. They were flying up and down the ice. They were making decisions really fast in the offensive zone. They spread us out, and I had to go from the corner to the front of the net, back to the corner again. That's when they're at their best. They haven't really found that yet. And if that's going to be what makes them hard to play against, that's going to be something that, in an 82-game season, it's going to have to be like 80% of the time. That's the idea. And you're going to win and lose with that, but that's the identity that you're going to have, because they're not going to have the so-called B game where, hey, we don't have the speed tonight. We don't have the legs. We don't have the jump. We're just not executing. Let's go let's take a shot at these guys on the way out. Like, let's kind of beat the wheels off them a little bit. Let's scrum it up in front of the net. Let's get a star player in the corner, give them an extra shot. You don't really see any of that gamesmanship with the team. Mm-hmm. And if that's not what they're going to do, that's not what they're going to do. But the speed factor, the decision making, like, they need to have the other team in the dressing room after the game saying, man, that was hard, because they were really fast and I never had the puck and I'm exhausted because of it.
And it's like it's almost like they think it should be easy. Like, they've been patted on the back. They've seen the reports throughout the summer. Oh, they're a contender. So we're going to go out there and we're just going to contend. It's just going to happen. And it's not. The stuff you just mentioned, Frankie, is all things that you have to consciously do to bring the speed, to reinvent kind of your approach to the game when things aren't going on, to change things on the fly. It's all a conscious thing that takes effort and a commitment to doing it. It doesn't just happen. And sometimes when you watch this team play, you're like, you guys just expect it just to happen? And I don't care who you are. Look back at those teams. Look back at like the Wings back in the day, and the Avalanche of this era, and like look at how they win. Look at what they do. It doesn't just happen. Nobody shows up in this league and just wins. You have to make it happen. The best teams are the ones with, they got skill and talent, but holy smokes, do they ever put the effort out there and put the hammer down every night and make teams win? And when they got it all going on and they catch a team snoozing, they smoke them and just expose them. And this team just doesn't do that. They just kind of do the bare minimum. And sometimes they're good enough to get by with a win when they do that. And then other times it's just like, are you kidding me?
Well, as you know, if you want to be a one-line team or a two-line team in the NHL and, have a really good power play and expect to win a lot of games, like I think there's a certain ceiling that you can have as that kind of team. And I've played on some good teams in my life, whether it was in the minors, and I played on some bad teams. The teams that I played on that were good, everyone kind of knew their defined role, and they did it to the best of their abilities. And it was almost like this pack mentality where there's a level of competitiveness within the group that kind of says like, okay, that's the first line. They went out there, they worked their asses off. That was a great offensive zone shift. What am I going to follow that up with my line? And the same goes for me on defense. Like that's how we would think all the time. I'd see some, the deep pair before me go out, beautiful, crisp breakout pass up the middle. And I'm going on the ice thinking, oh man, I want to do that too, because we're humming tonight. And it's like this pack mentality that you need to have in order to succeed and be a really good team. Like right now, I kind of see like Matthews is an animal. Like I see Matthews right now as an absolute animal. He's going in on the forecheck on the penalty kill, and he's stripping Gus Forsling, getting right through his arms, taking it hard to the net. And I'm like, this guy is doing what he needs to do. To me, like it reminds me, like for a brief time, played for the Penguins, played with Sid, and I got to see it firsthand how hard this guy works every day at practice and the intensity that he had in the games. And everyone followed suit because they knew that he was the best player on the team. And if you're not that guy, you better fall in line. For me, Matthews is at that level, and he's doing that right now. It's just everyone else needs to find a way to kind of fall in line a little bit more and elevate what they're doing. Because as far as like the number one player on the team, I have no issues with what he's brought to the table this year.
No, he's been an absolute monster. And I was just going to ask you to wrap up. Did Mike Babcock ever ask you for your phone to see your pictures?
Mike Babcock, I don't even think he knew
your
my
guy.
name most days. I think he just kind of like looked at me and was like, who let this guy in here? Like, is he job shadowing someone today? Like, that's nice. They gave him a hoodie and running shoes. That's cool. He's part of what is he, like the new stick boy?
Ouch on yourself.
Hey, what was your reaction to that when you saw that?
I honestly wasn't surprised. Like, no. I don't think this guy went away and did any kind of repenting. Just having known the kind of guy he is, he talks in the third person. Like, think about that. He talks in the third person. So anyone who's talking in the third person, chances are they're doing that kind of stuff. So it just, it didn't surprise me. I feel bad for the guys in Columbus that had to go through that before the season even started. It's such a distraction. But it doesn't surprise me that he's still got the circus act going. And to be honest with you, I don't feel bad for him at all because he's a bad guy and he got what he deserved and he probably should have had it coming to him sooner. But it's a shame because if you sit in a video room and you watch some hockey with the guy, you'll actually learn a thing or two. If you go out there and play through one of his practices, he runs a great practice. The stuff on the bench, like I never thought he was great on the bench. I think he's really stubborn. Like he's the kind of guy, he's got such an ego. It's like, the other team needs to adjust to what I'm doing. I'm not adjusting to them. All right, have fun, lose your game then. But yeah, I wasn't surprised at all. It's a shame because he can offer players a lot better. But he chooses to have a big ego and conduct his business in a circus-like way.